Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Noggins and this is the fifth walkthrough of my virtual reality project featuring the sets from Space 1999. This hopefully will be a quicker walkthrough than the last because mainly it just features three new minor additions. The main one being a way to rotate our environment. Now, there was a user on the Space 1999 forum who pointed out that it's very difficult to rotate around this environment if you experience it in a seated position. Now, when you're standing up, sure, you can turn around and do what you want, but from a seated position, it makes it very difficult. So I've added this additional functionality to the controllers that will allow you to rotate the world. Now, you still will need to be able to teleport around the scene over long distances, but at least you can do minor changes such as rotating or moving the world short distances. But before we talk about the world grabbing mechanism, let me just run through again the button layout on these controllers. So to move long distances, we use something called teleporting, and that is initiated using this touchpad button here. So if I aim, press the button, and then let go, I end up moving to that spot. Aim, let go, and then I'm there. So again, if I aim and let go, aim and let go, aim and let go. Now again, in reality, in the real environment, I can rotate and I can see what's behind me in the virtual environment. So we can do that, look around. So we're navigating using the teleport mechanism. Now the nice thing about teleporting is, and this is important for all of my scenes in this project, is I need to be able to teleport up onto things, and that includes the Eagle transporter, so you can teleport onto the top of the Eagle, or even if you're in the bottom of the launch pad, you want to teleport up onto the top. So you do need to be able to teleport up onto platforms like that. And then we can teleport down onto the floor or even teleport onto the furniture. Now, so that's all good and useful. But if you are in a seated position, you want to be able to at least rotate the world around. And so so we know about teleport. Now, and I should also point out the grab button. So the grab button is this little side button here. So if I put my controller inside an object, press the grab button, I've now got the object, and then I can throw it around. So that's grab, and we then have the little button at the top there. It's called the menu button. So press that, menu appears. Press it again, menu disappears. Press it again, the menu appears. And then I can interact with the menu by pressing the trigger button. So I can turn on, so if I come over to the menu, come over here, you can see there's this sort of floating screen captures that I've mentioned before. And then if I turn that off, the floating things disappear. And that's all done with the trigger button. So now how do we rotate the world? So I've now accounted for all of the buttons on the controller. So the way that you rotate the world is by using the trigger button, but you have to use both trigger buttons. So what you do is, basically, as soon as you press both trigger buttons, your hands have, in effect, grabbed the world. So now that I've grabbed the world, if I move my hands down, the world moves down. If I move my hands up, the world moves up. If I move my hands towards me, the world moves closer. And if I move it further away, it moves away. Now also, whilst I've grabbed the world, if I move my hands in a clockwise, in a rotation sort of manner, the world rotates. So I've just done a 180-degree turn. So again, if I start off in this location and then end up in this location, the world has rotated and so have my hands. So that's all there is to it. And it turns out to be a really handy little feature because, I mean, yeah, rotating the world, that's useful, but I find it far more handy to be able to inspect things. So if let's say we come over here and we want to inspect the detail in the panel up there. Now, in the past, you kind of were stuck. You look at it from the floor, or maybe you could teleport up onto the desk and then look at it a bit closer here. But that's as good as you could do. Now, with this world grabbing ability, if I press the two trigger buttons, I can bring the world closer to my headset. So I can come up here and inspect what's happening with these dials and look at the air grill. And then if we turn around, you can see we're floating in mid-air. Now, the other thing that you can do as well is you can move yourself through geometry. So the way that we reset our position is just teleport back down to the floor. And again, if I just bring the world closer, we can inspect this more closely. And I can rotate around, see the things. And so, for instance, if we want to look underneath the chair, it's easier just to grab the world and move the world and see what's happening from this level. And then if we continue going below the floor, we now see the geometry. And this is probably just worth pointing out. The geometry inside Unity, this game engine, it's always a single-sided geometry, which means it only renders from one side. When you look at a triangle or a rectangle from the opposite side, it becomes invisible, which is what's happening here. And I can just move this. So it turns out to be really handy to be able to inspect things. So now to go on to the next change that I made in this update is I've added the Commlock and the Stun Gun. In fact, let me just rotate that. So here we have the Commlock and Stun Gun, and so this is a classic example where we might want to inspect this in more detail. So again, if we can actually crouch, but crouching is for losers. So we can just grab the world and bring the world closer to us. And so here on the Commlock, you can see I've got a video loop running. It's the same video loop that's on those big screens over there, or the same one that's on that screen there. So yeah, so that's the Commlock. Now, with the Commlock and the Stun Gun, I found some really good photo images of the Commlock, particularly sitting on this Commander Koenig's desk. So I was able to get the scale of this Commlock pretty accurate, because it was sitting on the desk, and I know how big the desk is, and therefore I know how big the Commlock is. The Stun Gun was a different case. I did have a good photo of the Stun Gun. Pretty much, it was a kind of a full-on elevation of that, but it had the actor's hand behind the Stun Gun. So all I had to go to scale was to measure the actor's hand, and then measure my own hand, and then use that to size the Stun Gun. So as you can imagine, there's a little bit of error there, not knowing the size of the actor's hand and comparing it to my hand and all that sort of stuff. But I think I've got the proportions pretty close, if not the absolute dimension. Now there are there's at least 3 different versions of the Stun Gun. Mainly, there's a version without this slider on the top. So this slider sets the gun to be either in stun mode or kill mode. So there's a version without that. There's this version, and then there's another version with a different slider. I just had to pick one, and I picked that one. So if we look at the Stun Gun from all angles, we've got the little lanyard attachment point there, and then it was interesting with the Commlock. in terms of the text on this grey panel here, they use Letraset, and so the text on this portion here is really just generic font information that was on the Letraset sheet. So if we get in close, and I don't know if you can see that, but it says things like Helvetica, 24 point, medium, I think it says bold somewhere, text, just generic information relating to the font that was used on the Helvetica sheet. So in that case, I just kept it as the original. I guess I could have made up some science fiction-y type words, but in the end, I just kept it as it was in the original. Now, on the photo ID here, the small text at the bottom, again, that came off the Letraset sheet, and it was really just copyright information relating to the Letraset company. And so that I thought was just a little bit too wrong for the science fiction show. So I did keep my text the same size and the same number of lines and all that sort of business, but I did change the text so it doesn't say copyright, Letraset, blah, blah, blah. In this case, it says, if we get a bit closer, it says Commander John Koenig, MIT Department of Physics, blah, blah. So I've done 3 versions of the identification badge. There's John Koenig, I've done Helena Russell, and Victor Bergman. So, and I've got a Commlock down there with Helena Russell's picture on it. We'll have a look at that in a sec. As I said, so we've got our little speaker grill here. And again, that matches the number of holes, perforations, and all that sort of stuff that the original had. And then the little video camera. Down here at this bottom end, the original prop that had the functioning TV, in reality, it had a mess of wires that would come out of the bottom of this and feed into the video equipment that they had on set, which provided the picture on the TV screen. So really, there was no, I guess, particular detail that they had in mind for this bottom bit. But they did have a different version of this Commlock, a non-functioning version, and that non-functioning version had a wire grid, which is not what I've shown here. I did find another photo of this Commlock, which didn't have the wire grid, but it was very vague and dark inside, and to me it seemed obvious that it was not a wire grid. So I saw some other reproductions of the Commlock where they had this sort of treatment, and I thought it just as valid for me to do this as the wire grid on the non-functioning version and so on. So I ended up doing this type of detail for the end piece. Yeah, so that's the buttons. Yeah, this one obviously has got this concave treatment on that. You had the belt clip. So if we come down here to this version, this is the one with Helena Russell on it. And then that's the text that I put on for her. Now this code here, M81003, that's definitely wrong. I think all the Commlocks that I could tell from the TV show anyway had this code, the C83102. They all had that, but I did see some reproductions which had a different code for the different people. So even though I don't think that happened in the TV show, but the reproductions used it, so I just copied suit. But I did make one change. Instead of saying C, which they all said, I changed it to M, and I figured that stands for medical. And then for Victor Bergman, I've got an S there, which I assume stands for science, and then C for John Koenig, which stands for command. So that's the Commlock. Now, in this environment, we can't pick any. If I try to pick it up, I can't. But I do have that other scene, the diorama scene, and in that scene we can interact with these objects. So let's go to the diorama scene. So if I bring up the menu and then go to diorama, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a panorama that I did from my hometown. Okay, so here we are in the diorama scene, and let me just reset the position of the objects. So when I reset, you can see those 4 objects will fall down to the platform, and that's sort of your visual cue that these things are in fact interactable. So as before, I've already shown you, but yeah, this is interactable. We can do whatever. And the eagle is interactable, so I can just put that there. And now we've got these 2 new additions, which is the Commlock and the Stun Gun. So you can see gravity was enabled. So if I pick up the Commlock and then drop it, it drops as per moon gravity. I go to Earth gravity, it drops more realistically as per Earth. But to inspect them, I think what I'll do is set it to no gravity. So now I can just leave that in space and we can see a video running on it, and we can see John Koenig sitting there. So we can inspect it from all angles. The other thing that I've added is, if we go to the menu, we've got Commlock, Photo ID, Koenig, Russell, and Bergman. So if I go to Russell, you can see Helena Russell there on the Commlock. It's very difficult to let go of this without imparting some sort of rotational momentum. And there we have Victor, Russell, Bergman, Koenig. Come on, there we go. Yeah, so I think they turned out okay. It was difficult to get good high-resolution photos, and these are not high-resolution, but they actually look pretty good in VR. They do on my headset anyway. So that's the Commlock. This is the Stun Gun, and we can have it floating there. Focus size comparison. Bring that a bit closer. So you can interact, and in fact here you can see the red kill option, just the sliver of the red there. Now one of the things in VR is if you bring geometry too close to the headset, it ends up clipping. So if I do that now, you can see the geometry is being clipped. So what I can do is actually bring it close enough so that the button clips, and then we can see the kill option underneath the button. So yeah, so that's the Stun Gun. Now, in terms of the physics of these objects, I've given the Stun Gun and this controller a mass of 400 grams. So when one hits the other, you get sort of an equal, you get kind of an equal bounce. But this thing has a mass of about 8 kilograms. So when that hits it, this responds appropriately. Now, I ended up going online on the Catacombs website to find out the mass or the weight of the 44-inch eagle that was modelled for the TV show. And because the eagle was made out of brass tubing and lots of steel, it was actually quite heavy. So it was 16 kilograms in weight. And so if this is 16 kilograms and this controller is 400 grams, when you throw the controller at that, it responds appropriately as per real mass and inertia and all that sort of stuff. So if I yeah. So that is that. That's the new edition of the Commlock and the Stun Gun. Now, I think I've promised this before, but I think this was definitely probably going to be the last walkthrough for a little while. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see you all next year. Bye.